Over the next few decades, the metaverse will become immensely more advanced and integrated in our daily lives. Some people think the metaverse is just a hype. Others believe it to be the greatest evolution of the internet. Together with the sharpest minds in this space, we are going to explore the future of the metaverse. We want to understand the impacts of this new world, and in this show, we will find the answers. Welcome to Metaverse Mentors.
Welcome at Metaverse Mentors, everyone. Today we're going to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is education. And I know we've talked about it already a lot. We have talked about Ed3 with Scott Mayer in previous episodes. We have been able to identify different challenges in the education system. One of them was, of course, the massive student debt. Secondly, the disconnection between the labor market and when you graduate out of university, decrease of the attention span. But what's interesting is that the gentlemen we have today have identified a whole new issue, or actually identified a way to optimize education from a whole different angle, because what they are building is a decentralized cognitive digital identity platform, something I had never heard of before. But we have luckily enough time to discuss and research that more narrowly today. So gentlemen, Dom, Steve, welcome at Metaverse Mentors.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Samir. It's great to be here, man.
Yes, no problem. Thank you for being here again. So when I was researching what you guys have been doing with Sona Protocol, I got a whole lot of epiphanies and revealing new insights where I was like, I never thought about this. And there's a whole array of challenges in the education system. Some of them I already shared. And I'm wondering, what triggered you guys, or what was like the revealing insight where it was like, okay, this is the way we are going to do it?
Yeah, it's always interesting to think back. It's never always necessarily one kind of thing, but I suppose I would point back to, so let me tell you a story, Samir. I'm a storyteller, so let's start there. I have an uncle, my Uncle Pete, right? And he left school when he was 14, back in the 1970s, with very little in terms of academic qualifications, right? And he then, because he had to leave school to go and earn money for his family, they ended up joining the Air Force. And in that time in the Air Force, what they realized was actually there's a really good brain here. And he ended up balancing warplanes with men and materials, making sure planes didn't fall out the sky, right? Actually, what is involved there is incredible mathematical computations. But when he left the Air Force, he wasn't able to get any kind of job, any kind of role. Here was a guy who was literally, deciding life and death things in war zones. But because he didn't have certain grades or certain qualifications from school or college like that, he just wasn't ever able to get those kind of roles that his brain deserved. And that always fascinated me as a kid, because we used to call him the calculator man, me and my brother, right? So he'd come and we'd be able to go, hey, Uncle Pete, what's 3022 times 624? And there'd be like a little moment, right? A little beat. And then he'd come up with the answer. We'd have the calculator and he'd be right. And we couldn't believe, we thought this was magic, right? But what he was just a guy with this incredible mathematical reasoning ability. But if you think about that, what that, as I got older, I began to think about, okay, well, there's an incredible bright mind that is effectively going to waste. Don't get me wrong, he eventually got to a place, he taught himself to code, but for years and years, here was a bright mind that was just not being used to its full potential in any way. So I began to think about, well, that's, in the UK, right? We're one of the richest countries in the world. So how many bright minds are being wasted across the world, right? And it's like, when we start to think about the reputation system that exists, that we still really use to decide, well, who's smart and who isn't, really, it's an analog system in a digital world, right? That jumble of numbers and letters that that come out at the end of, maybe it's school, maybe it's college, actually aren't very good markers of intelligence. So was kind of got my Uncle Pete to to blame for how this started the story and how it started to think is, well, what does it mean to be smart?
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me because I've been through the different layers of university and was a lot of knowledge acquisition, and of course you need a certain discipline, but then when you're going in the professional field and you're going to present your accolades or credentials, what you're basically doing is kind of inflating what you have learned, but not really demonstrating like, okay, this is what I can do, this is how I handle myself in this particular situation. I think it's just one abstraction of what you can do, but there are things like leadership, mathematical reasoning, doing calculations. You don't need to go into university for that 4 years. Those are kind of natural or genetical capabilities, if you will. And yeah, what I'm also interested in, I read about different kind of intelligence. You allude to that also a little bit already. You have emotional intelligence, just your IQ. But what I read at Sona Protocol, there's also these things like crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. Can you explain us what those two are and why it's important to recognize the difference between those?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say that the research into intelligence is still evolving all the time, right? If you speak to cognitive psychologists, we've got a number on our team, and neuroscientists, they'll tell you that we understand around about 10% of how the brain actually works. Right, so we're discovering this all the time, but easiest way in terms of thinking of fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence is exactly what you were talking about before, Samir, really, is when you're getting those grades out of school or university or whatever, really what you're measuring is how good are you at taking in information, storing it, and repeating that information. So crystallized intelligence is your knowledge, your sort of think about it as your database of information that you accrue. It's built out of learned experience. Your fluid intelligence, the easiest way to think about it is your raw cognitive ability. So it's almost like your potential to learn new things. For example, one of that might be your spatial ability, which is something that we'll be measuring on through the games in Sona, right? So you remember those, maybe you've sort of had those kind of puzzles before, but here's a shape, we've rotated it. Which of these 4 shapes is still that? That's actually your ability to manipulate objects in 3D. Now that is a real core cognitive function. That's part of your fluid intelligence. It's the raw ability that you can then apply to many different situations. So it's interesting when you look as well in terms of fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence about how our intelligence changes across a lifetime. So did you know that your fluid intelligence, on average in humans, unfortunately for me, I'm past it, but our peak is around about your early 30s. So that fluid intelligence, your raw cognitive ability, peaks around about there. It doesn't drop off a cliff necessarily, but that tends to be the peak. And you can see that in, for example, Charles Darwin, right, wrote The Origin of Species, this incredible leap of intelligence and imagination. He started writing it when he was about 28. You look at Einstein and the theory of relativity, started writing it about kind of 27. So your fluid intelligence, and this often is aligned with real kind of big leaps or breakthroughs, peaks around there. Your crystallized intelligence, fortunately, actually doesn't peak until your sort of 60s, 50s and 60s. And you can begin to think of that, I suppose, more as the wisdom and the ability to apply all of that knowledge store and see how to connect to the dots.
Okay, so that's good. That's good to hear. I'm 26, so that seems that there's still hope for me. Then to
this all of a sudden it becomes real now. So you're just sort of hitting your straps, mate. You're just beginning to get.
Glad to hear that, and I understand the notion of this crystallized, no, the fluid intelligence depreciating after 31 or 32. But to me, the fluid intelligence seems also like if you are a football player. I've been on football when I was young. Then you had this like incredibly talented guys, and no matter how much I train, I wouldn't get at their level. There's just a natural gift you have or you haven't. But is fluid intelligence, is that trainable? And the reason why I ask that is, if I make a certain test at 13 years old and it seems that I suck incredibly at spatial reasoning, that's maybe incredibly disencouraging to improve myself on the field. And what I'm afraid of, if we do these tests, that we are getting discouraged to improve ourselves, because I believe personally, but I don't know the scientific evidence behind that if you work, like mathematics is a complicated subject in of itself, but by practice and exercise you improve yourself. So can you tell me a bit about that? Or maybe Dom, I don't know.
Yeah, well, should I, you leap in?
No, yeah, you cover this one.
Okay, so yeah, you can absolutely improve your abilities in different cognitive domains. Now, one of those ways is to practice and keep working at those kind of skills. So if that mathematical reasoning, as you say, if you were to continue regularly testing your brain, then you would absolutely improve in that cognitive domain, but only to a point, just by practicing. So there are you sort of referenced it in one of your first points. Genetically, you inherit certain capabilities, right? And that is going to drive a lot of your ability. But they reckon around about 50% of the variation in ability is inherited. 50% is around environmental. So things such as your diet, massively important. Things such as your quality of sleep, things like meditation, even time spent with friends and laughing was a really interesting one about not necessarily being able to massively improve that intelligence over time, but allow you to perform at your optimum abilities. So when you play a game, and we'll obviously come on to this, when you play one of a series of games on Sona, absolutely, we're doing a number of things, but we're showing you your profile and your progression over time, and you'll receive those kind of rewards accordingly. But we see this very much as a play where we can begin to feed in those other bits of information. So, actually, we want to be able to give the Sona community those kind of tips and ideas for how to improve their lifestyle, as opposed to optimize their intelligence. So it might be in terms of nootropics. So nootropics are natural brain supplements that you can take to improve your neuroplasticity. It might be meditation courses and things like that. But you need to think of it holistically rather than
ironically, I never got tips or advice or suggestions at school about sleeping, dieting, meditation. So it's interesting that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. We want, and we can go into more of the detail around, what the first Sona app feels like. But we want to. There's an analogy with, say, Strava or something like Apple Health or Google Health, that we want people to almost sort of be nurturing their own brain in the same way that they would do while exercising. And it's a mobile first game, the first platform that we're launching. It's native iOS and Android apps, and that does give us some advantage in allowing users to connect their Sona data, say, with health data, so they can understand the impact of sleep or diet or exercise. That's the kind of experiential approach that we're trying to give to our community and the participants.
I think that's a great point, that holistic approach, because I feel that's currently lacking in the current approach of education. But we actually plugs into what I want to ask after this one. We kind of skipped over Sona Protocol as a whole and what the goals are and which kind of use case you are going to try to tackle. Can you give us a rundown on Sona Protocol itself?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's worth thinking about the protocol. There's a number of layers to it. So, it's, internally at least, Sona Protocol refers to the underlying identity platform and the various mechanisms that support that. I mean, just take a step back for a minute. We think there's this macro trend of learning, work, and play becoming sort of irretrievably intertwined. And my view on some play to earn gaming is actually it's the very sort of nascent demonstration of some new ways to work rather than necessarily new ways to play. And there's, I mean, you mentioned before we came on the podcast, why Web3? Why have we gone down this route? And we can unwrap and unpack some of that a little bit. But yes, going back to the main point, so Sona Protocol is the underlying identity platform, which allows us to manage user identity. Because one of the things that we're also strong believers in is that in this world where learning, work, and play are becoming intertwined, and where there's going to be an increasing demand for more of a kind of live stream of your kind of cognitive abilities and your cognitive identity, and consumer demand for products like that, there isn't a platform which allows users to operate in that world as yet. So that's kind of, in terms of sort of big picture from a technology perspective, that's our objective. So there's the protocol. On top of that, there are a number of other layers, but if we simplify and say that there's a gaming engine which is designed to deliver content to users, bring users together, match make, and do all of those sort of things that you'd expect. A lot of the mechanics in the first game are quite similar to what you'd expect to see in a free-to-play mobile game, and we've leaned on a lot of the game design, art and science that's been evolved and perfected over the last decade or two in that area. So from a user perspective, the way we're going to market is we're just referring to the core app as Sona rather than Sona Protocol, in the sense that there's a slight difference there. And from a consumer experience perspective, it's a mobile app that they can download, they can immediately onboard onto in a really simple way. And once they open the app, then they are presented with actually their Sona. So the Sona for a user is a kind of beautiful, mysterious object that is a reflection of how much you're training your brain and exercising your brain. So the data that the user creates informs the dynamic visual identity that they're presented back with. And we're trying to do some really nice things with trying to get users to get attached to this object that they've got in the app that almost like sort of putting a mirror up to themselves. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the sort of different facets of the experience. There's different play modes. So there's solo play, there's head-to-head play, there's sort of more tournament-based play with specific prizes and partners, and we're getting ready to start to announce some of that kind of stuff to the community. But in terms of sort of high-level user experience, if you almost sort of think of it as it's like a journey through your own mind. We're trying to create this sense of progression and journeying, and users going through different stages as they perhaps try different play styles, different explorations. And in doing that, we can also sort of tell them about the science and so on that is supporting the experience that they're going through.
Yeah, to me it kind of seems like you're kind of decoding or dissecting or deciphering your own mind and brain. So that's really really interesting.
It's probably important to mention just technically how the identity mechanism works. So we're not storing a huge amount of data on chain. We're using on-chain verification to ensure that the creator of each sort of data set. So each user, the more they interact, obviously they're creating a larger and more interesting data set for themselves. Almost all of that data is stored on the user device, so even we can't access it. So it's stored on the user device, it's encrypted using the private key in the wallet that is within the Sona mobile app. And they can choose to back that up in other ways if they so wish. But the user, this is one of our very clear design principles. We believe data that's sensitive should be owned by the user. So we're only able to access a very small slice of that data to enable us to perform some sort of core dynamics within the app, such as putting players together, ranking them in simple ways, and awarding prizes and rewards.
Oh, that greatly addresses the self-sovereignty concerns of Web3 people, and I think people in the future, just to visualize the app more vividly. So I'm opening the app, and you already mentioned, Steve, like spatial reasoning, and Dom, you mentioned head-to-head games. Perhaps there are also other kind of intelligences that you are going to impact. How should I envision that? So I open a game and there will be like particular patterns or particular questions or exercises that I have to solve, and based on my performance, a particular output will come, like, okay, you reached level 11 from 20, and then you can improve yourself and continuously engage.
I mean, broadly speaking, it's like that. The game is compartmentalized into what we're calling zones. So each zone might have a thematic approach. It may have a sort of specialization in what cognitive domains it's testing, such as spatial awareness, executive function, for example. And it might have a play mode that we call mode. So it could be solo, it could be head-to-head, it could be tournament. Tournament is similar to head-to-head, but there's probably a team version as well, which we're going to bring out, but that's further down the roadmap. So yeah, users can unlock zones and then continue through them and participate in them, either alone or with a social group of the members of the community. And over time, more and more zones will be introduced. So we've got a big roadmap and a huge list of potential zones that are going to be rolled out with different game styles, measuring different areas of cognitive function, as you mentioned. I mean, Steve can probably talk about that in more depth, but there's lots of, I guess, other cognitive domains that we're looking at measuring in the future, such as even things like imagination, determination, things like that are sort of more complementary. And to a point, we're focusing hard on that because going to your earlier point about what if I play and participate and I don't feel like I've scored very well? Is it disheartening? The view is all brains are valuable. They're just different shapes. And there's game dynamics which will be more sort of adversarial and so on, but there are others that so we're working hard to ensure that we don't sort of immediately alienate parts of the community in those sorts of
really
ways.
exciting. Is there, by the way, sorry, so just a quick question. Is there, by the way, a specific demographic that you had in mind, like the youth or young professionals, or is it for everyone? What did you guys have in mind?
Yeah, but it's interesting is because obviously we've raised via private equity and venture capital, and they're always sort of saying, who's the demographic?
I am not a venture capitalist, by the way, just disclaimer.
It's an instinctive thing, right? It's an instinctive thing when we're thinking about products. So, it's the right question to ask. Dom, very early doors when we began working, shared with me the jobs to be done theory and job stories, which you may be familiar with, which looks at, recognizes the sort of foundational importance of thinking about personas and audience personas and demographics, but also recognizes that they can be very limiting, right? And actually, often when you really dig down, there is far more similarities between different sort of demographics than you might believe. So we like to think of it as, actually for people who are overlooked, undervalued, and that it's a way for them to better understand their intelligence compared to others. And actually, that could very well be somebody who, for whatever reason, couldn't access college education, so doesn't seem to be getting access to the kind of job roles or projects or whatever that they wish to. Equally, it could be somebody who's very much interested in their own. We were talking before about decline in terms of cognitive ability. So you can see a lot of people who are in later stages of life beginning to think about how do I keep my brain active, concerns around sort of mental health in terms of dementia and Alzheimer's. There's a big kind of market around that too. So early doors, we see a Web3 audience, but certainly a Web 2.5 kind of audience as well. People who are curious, who are probably in that sort of quantified self sort of space. So I often speak to people and it's like, do we not think it's strange that most people, when you ask them, can tell you maybe how many steps they've taken that day or, what their resting heart rate is, but very little about the nature of their brains, their intelligence. And if we are anything... The most vital...
Yeah.
It makes no sense. So as Don was saying before, we will start with these 5 cognitive...
Can you repeat those 5 just to reiterate?
Yeah, well, actually, at the moment, we are just looking at how exact the naming conventions with them, but fundamentally you've got spatial awareness, you've got two different types of verbal intelligence, you have reasoning, and I'll come back to you with the fifth because my brain's not kind of woken up yet.
We put the fifth one in the underlying section, no problem.
Planning. There we go. Yeah. So planning, which is essentially executive function. But we start with those. But as Dom said, that is the reason is because that is the bit that's missing when people look at those, let's say, numbers and letters from qualification. Well, what is the raw ability amongst them, beneath them? But around those, of course, there are all of these other layers that are valuable too, and that are often hidden, right? Are often hidden. So Don mentioned before about imagination. We can absolutely measure imagination, and we can absolutely measure curiosity. And what's exciting for us is we can do that in a gamified environment. The reason why you could go and take an IQ test if you wanted to understand exactly how my cognitive domains stack up, but there's a reason why people don't. It feels like being tested, right? And we instantly shrink back from that. And, those kind of really formal environments, if you were going to do an IQ test with Mensa, for example, it would be a 2-hour test in a room with an adjudicator. And this naturally puts so many people off. Whereas there's no reason to do that. We're working with our cognitive psychologist partners have, over the last 3 or 4 years, been really working and have proven now that you can measure those cognitive domains, measure intelligence, general intelligence, just as well in a mobile game environment as you can do within a.
But if I can tie into that point to pick up on that thought, like if I have an exam like in 2 weeks, I'm going to plan to save some time blocks to study for the particular exam and perhaps the Mensa IQ test. But if I'm occasionally playing Duolingo to develop my Spanish, I'm not like in this comparably competitive mode like when I would have an exam. So how do you ensure that that's a representative variable that you get out of that? Because I take it less seriously because I'm less naturally or intrinsically less invested into that one.
Yeah, and there's an important point there in that, and it kind of connects to the audience as well, which, as Steve said, we expect the audience to evolve over time, but likewise, we've got to with delivering any complex tech product, particularly one that you want to be sort of a mass market consumer product, which we absolutely do, despite the fact it's got sort of Web3 infrastructure and economics behind it. We're spending a lot of time working out in what order we roll out features, because on day one when we launch, the first time users aren't going to have developed a huge amount of data. So there's a balance that we've got to strike between fun and early rewards for users, so they feel that they're there, and they don't have to be monetary rewards. It could be emotional rewards and giving them some sort of feedback on what they're doing. But in the early days, we're trying to get traction. We're trying to scale. We're trying to scale the product, and in doing that, test and validate the features that we think are the most important ones, and then over the top of that, over a slightly longer period of time, we'll gradually start to layer some of the more. We'll start to surface more of the ability to understand the data, to provide users with some clearer structure around it, and something which is, I guess, feels more rigorous and is benchmarked against more standard kind of cognitive testing. So we've got a parallel strand of activity once we launch to benchmark all of the data that we're collecting. We're not, in the early days, we're not providing users with any kind of numerical score for intelligence, whether it's IQ or something else, or G. We're steering away from that quite clearly for the first period of time. Just going back to the audience point, there's some work that we're planning at the moment, just around sort of starting to test the ground, understand what user preferences are, and trying to understand kind of what those early and then sort of midterm demographics are likely to be like. So some of that's marketing some traditional product marketing stuff. Some of it is likely to tie into some sort of NFT drop. We're just looking at how best to do that. But there's I won't go into detail about that right now. That's one. Maybe that's one for the next time.
100%. I'm curious how that will unfold. So, what is the underlying end game of all of this? Because I already touched upon some points. Ideologically, or like in a utopical world, I would have a more meritocratic representation of finding a job or getting hired for a particular exercise, instead of like this asymmetry where I have to study 4 years for skills I'm not going to use in any way.
Yeah.
But next to that, we would have, for example, the Sona app, or I don't know. I just this just comes to my mind, like Duolingo, and they have this employer that needs to do the trade-off. Like, okay, we have graduates coming out of university that has been best practice for decades, and we have some successes there. And now we need to do the trade-off. Need to make the trade-off between guys who did a gamified app and can demonstrate their abilities there. How do you envision the future for Sona?
So long-term vision at high level, we want to create a global standard for cognitive identity, and in doing that, we recognise very clearly that this is a platform play. It's not a play where we're going to build all of the experiences on top of the protocol. So if you think of sort of near to mid-term strategy, we're building out a number of experiences on top of the protocol, which allow you to interact with it and create data and explore that data in meaningful ways. There's a very rigorous tokenomic design that underpins both the game and the protocol layer. So there's an element of rewards in there, but there's also a very clear view of how community, and not just by end user community, how other participants in the community are going to kind of create value together. But if we looked at that sort of platform play 3 to 5 years from now, ideally we want to get enough traction to create this as a standard, to encourage developer communities to build other experiences on top of the protocol. So that could be small groups of people or individuals building a game that they enjoy. It could be a corporate organization building something that they can use internally to build teams and understand how to use different team members together most effectively. Yet there are obvious use cases that we're already hard at work on, like submitting a snapshot of your Sona data with the job application, say early on as a complementary element, say, to a resume. But over time, we want that to gain in importance and so on. I mean, in terms of what it feels like and what it looks like in 5 years, I think I'm strongly of the view that it's an augmented reality platform. And if you think of your Sona as your kind of companion through this new world of more fragmented education that isn't necessarily in sort of blocks of time, it's more continuous through your life, it's more modular and dynamic, but also this sort of converged world of work, play and learning, be able to sort of support that on a daily basis.
I think this lends itself to a plethora of earning models. What is going to be the key earning model for Sona? Is that NFTs or the tokens, or what is it going? A subscription?
It's a bit of both. We are looking at subscriptions. We're undecided on that side at the moment. There's definitely some value in it for offering some sort of premium functionality, but that's going to be defined, I think, by some of the early market testing that we do. Users can earn rewards from partners, so very more traditional kind of mechanisms to win prizes, say for winning a tournament. So there's that sort of thing. You can accumulate game tokens. So within the first game, there's non-native tokens that are run within the game engine. So you can accumulate those and do swaps and actually cash those out for the our native tokens. So there's another mechanic there. So initially they're the main two, but once we get to a scale of having a more meaningful data set for each given user, then there'll be many opportunities for those users to monetize the data in the way that they choose. So very much driven by them around sort of opting in and perhaps sharing some of their data just for a short period of time, or sharing it for in different ways for aggregate analysis, for example. There's a native advertising format as well within the early game, which is quite neat. And it's by native I mean it's an advertising format that sits very well with all of the games in there in a way that doesn't feel like it's advertising. It's really cool and fun, and allows users to accumulate collectibles based on interaction with different third parties.
Oh, that's really interesting. By the way, I'm not a tokenomics expert, but we discussed this in some previous episode, and one of the tendencies that we identified there is that a lot of play to earn are flawed, because what you're seeing is there's a lot of value injectors in the beginning, and then everything starts to drop as soon as the increase of users starts to stagnate. Would you see yourself also as a play to earn, or is the play and earn, or what is the tokenomics idea behind that?
Yeah, I think play firmly in the sort of play and earn space. We're in no way pushing this as something which a user is going to necessarily earn a full income from. It remains to be seen what the precise differentials are between different user types, but we've spent a lot of time building out a validation simulation of the tokenomics model, which is quite surprisingly unusual for Web3 projects to actually go to that level of detail. So we've got a simulation that brings together all of the game economy and all of the related rewards in there, with all the tokenomic pools and the emission rates of each of those, and actually a model of a DEX too. So we can start to model all of those kind of interlocking components and understand at what point does the economy reach a sustainable place. So obviously early on, you're always going to give out some rewards. You're going to provide a higher weighting of incentives to early community participants to ensure that they keep coming back. And so it's understanding where that tipping point is into sustainability. But we believe that the model that we've got, we've got another round of work to do on it to integrate some of the, I guess, sort of more B2B revenue components. But it indicates that we've got a strong, sustainable model.
Really?
Everything.
Yeah, in terms of those B2B elements, Samir, obviously that's going to become more apparent over the next few months as we can announce some of those. But I think we've obviously, everyone always leaps to the kind of recruitment angle and look at the cost of screening within corporate HR at the moment. So if you think of an audience where we get to a mass market play when actually people are submitting their Sona alongside a resume or whatever other things that make up their kind of identity, we're taking that kind of cost away. We're also, those screenings often happen after somebody's jumped through a few hoops, like have they got a college degree? Yes, no. Have they got that amount of experience? So the fact that we can bring there removes a lot of cost, and the way that we're working through at the moment with the technical mechanics of how those kind of organizations would interact with the Sona, but clearly we are going to want to have that highly integrated into our token. So those B2B businesses will need to interact with our token or NFT in some capacity. But there's also insurance, financial services. That if you choose as a Sona user to share that data because your intelligence is favorably correlated with
car
things
driving,
such as how long you like. Yeah, car driving. I was speaking with a guy with one insurer the other day, and the length of your drive that you put your car on is a data point that they take into deciding what your premium should be, right? If they're taking something like the length of your drive, surely your intelligence and how your kind of mental state is a huge kind of data point that's missing at the moment. They were really excited about that. So you can see how they would want to interact with the protocol. But as I say, it's the whole principle around it is we are not selling people's data, obviously, on the back. As Dom said, we designed it so that we can't even access kind of the data. But should a Sona holder wish to share their Sona, will monetize how that B2B brand or business interacts.
But that has yet to be identified. So let's say I share my I don't know, my intelligence or my self control on in a game, which could be extrapolated like me being frustrated on the highway and increasing the probability of incident, which the insurer would take into account, and I would share that data to the insurer. There is going to be constructed a monetization model on top of that without Sona seeing my data, or
Correct. Yeah. The mechanics of data sharing. I won't go into the detail of it now, but the mechanics of data sharing are kind of peer to peer, I guess, in the sense that if you want to share a snapshot or a time limited version, or a certain slice of the data that you've created with a given person. In overview, the mechanics are you can provide them with a means to look at that data. And there's lots of there's various ways that we're planning for that. Some of it's as simple as a kind of one-time view web link that goes out, but it's important to understand that the main NFT that the user gets is a non-transferable NFT. So that is the Sona from a consumer end user perspective. That NFT is the representation of identity. If you think of it as the kind of passport, we use this term cognitive passport, and it's analogous to the mechanics of how a passport works in that it's a reference of your identity rather than your identity itself. So when you share some or all of your data with a third party, there's a hash of the. Each time your data is updated within the Sona platform, we insert a hash of that data into the Sona NFT. So there's a cross-referenceable data point there that a third party can use to validate the identity of the person who's sharing the data and the integrity of the fact that they created that data themselves. So there's some more layers to that, but in broad terms, that's how that works.
Fascinating. I hear so many elements, like the infrastructure layer, the functional layer, the neurological background and science behind that, how you're going to gamify it. There's so many components. What is the most difficult about all of this?
All of those things together. I think we have had this conversation with a number of people. I think I've done a lot of work, for example, in financial services, building platforms for risk analysis in sort of $1 billion financial portfolios and automated trading. And I would say this project is more complicated than that was. You're right. There's all of these different moving parts. We've got the cognitive science. It's got to be fun. It's got to be a good game. We've got to have a viable, sustainable token economy. We've got to have the ability to kind of serve data, serve content to users and matchmake them and all that kind of thing. There's the game engine. So each time we kind of move something on one side, then we have to readjust things on the other because all of it's quite tightly linked together. So it's incredibly fun. But it does. I think it's quite a unique combination of. It's a project with a lot of different facets that are being put together in one place.
And that really excites me. And not to play the venture capitalist again, but having to take into account so many elements. What is your idea on the go-to market? Because I can definitely recognize that this is going to be an incredibly relevant and cool app. But then on top of all of that, you also have to reach the audience and deliver that.
Yeah,
what's your idea and thoughts there?
I mean, we're helped to a point. Steve can probably go into some of the marketing in a bit more depth, but we're helped to a point by the fact that this is mobile first, and native mobile apps have an enormous sort of distribution infrastructure, ready-made via app stores and so on. So that's certainly a component of it. There's various partners that we're talking to around the launch as well, just to galvanise that. We might align it with one or more events. Our community is very young still. It's only just really sort of opened its doors, and we've had some big technical things to solve, but we're kind of now at the point where all of those things are very clear, and we're about to start ramping up on that side. So I guess the answer is it's going to be a multi-pronged approach involving, some more straightforward web marketing. There's going to be a bunch of partnerships. There's particularly around some events, and delivery via app
So
stores.
I can not wait to start unpacking my own brain, like practically speaking in terms of timeline. When will users have the opportunity to first try and play around with the first iterations of Sona?
Yeah, there'll be some pre-release versions. So there'll be an alpha and a beta, closed beta, and then an open beta. And community members will absolutely have, there'll be some of the people with the earliest opportunity to play some of the pre-release games. And from pretty much the end of next week, we've got a fairly steady stream of stuff that the community will be able to review and give us feedback on as well, which will start to unveil some of the ways people play and that kind of stuff. So the alpha kind of late January is what our roadmap says at the moment. The beta probably late February, early March, and then a full launch. We're probably still going to have some level of restriction over the launch, which is sort of late March, early April. So after that, we may have a 2-month period where we likely gate access, probably through some of the NFT collections that we're going to be dropping before the actual app launches.
Okay, all right. So perhaps a question for Steve. The word Web3 has repeatedly been dropped throughout this podcast. But if I'm honest, like Metaverse Mentors is all about Web3 and Metaverse. But what excites me the most about this entire concept is the cognitive and neurological part, and the ability to demonstrate and like get to know better your own brain. And it doesn't seem like a Web3 typical project at all. Is that something that surprises you, Steve, this response, or?
No, it doesn't surprise me, and I think we are a lot of the reason why we are building on Near is because it's kind of making, from a user experience, trying to make all that kick into the background. We absolutely see that. In fact, and you'll see it from some of our early partnerships that we hope to be able to talk about soon. It's this sort of Web3 curious, or Web 2.5 as it's been referred to, which thinks is going to be a big driver behind Sona, as well as those people who actually are looking at it from purely an NFT or in terms of in terms of the fungible token. But no, it doesn't surprise me. I think if you look at the how much mobile gaming has grown just over the last 10 years. So mobile gaming now accounts for well over half of all gaming revenue. Although she wouldn't consider herself a gamer, my mum, who's 76, plays Wordle and all of these kind of Web 2 mobile games all the time. So the breadth of across not just demographics but geography is absolutely massive. So from a mobile gaming perspective, from a quantified self perspective, the number of people who are tracking themselves in a Web 2 environment, be it there from an exercise perspective or whatever else, all of those things converging in the Web 2 space, we want to be able to bring into Sona. It's just if we think about, as Don was sort of saying, about that work and play being intertwined, is the Web3 thing allows that data to be owned and to be able to apply that data is then Web3 allows it to be really rich, it allows it to be accurate, it allows it to be live, and then it can unlock all of those different opportunities. So it should very much feel like a Web 2 kind of experience, but with all of that Web3 infrastructure engineering.
Yeah, there's a balance to be struck. I think we don't want. It's not from our perspective. We want this to be a mass market product, but it's not an either or choice. We're using the unique underpinnings and decentralized advantages of Web3, but we do want to abstract the technicalities of that under the surface, which is a trend we're going to see, moving faster and faster over the next few years. There's always already some great work being done in different ecosystems other than near as well to really simplify and make the whole experience much more accessible. If you look at the stuff that like Dapper Wallet guys are doing, it's clearly been thought about from a consumer perspective, what a consumer needs from that kind of tool, and in a similar way, we're thinking very hard about all of that sort of stuff, and where the team are kind of relentlessly every day trying to remove little bits of friction, yet still stay true to this fact that we want this to be, it is going to be a community-owned platform at some point, and again, there's degrees of that. We will gradually we'll do some progressive decentralization in terms of how ownership and governance works. But governance is also a really important strand of this for us, in that what the data we're collecting and measuring and providing users with feedback on is probably some of the most sensitive data that you could be dealing with in many respects. So the governance around the models we use for measurement and the sort of means that we use to benchmark, I guess, the data and contextualize it, it's really important to us early on that we're not the sole decision makers around that. So that's going to be the first area that you see being decentralized, particularly in terms of around the sort of governance decisions on how that works.
Yeah, to me that resonates a lot. For me, like Web3 is more of a architectural dimension instead of, because previously you saw a lot of price like, okay, we put Web3 like the identity on top, a layer on top of it, and then we are like this super innovative organization. But I think it's about the key use cases that we have touched upon, and the architecture allowing that to be able to do it in a decentralized way or be community driven. So yeah, that makes sense. Perhaps yes.
I think it has to be. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say it has to be. In terms of our mission, we're looking to make discovering the true nature of your intelligence accessible, fun, and progressively rewarding. Right. So this has to be. Think of it from a. I'm going to go big picture here. Right. It's like genuinely over the next 100 years, as a species, we've got some of the most incredible challenges to solve. Right. We cannot afford to let so many bright minds go to waste. If you look at, there's a report from BCG a couple of years back that said a thing called skills mismatch, which essentially is not having the right intelligence in the right places. People doing things that they are capable of more of, right? Well, actually, there's the cost of that each year is estimated to be about $18 trillion.
Whoa.
$18 trillion. Just for perspective, that's about the GDP of the entire EU a couple of years ago, right? And this is very real consequences. Not only is it, I would say, unfair in the way that certain people can access those kind of college degrees and some people can't across the world, but actually, it is. It basically affects us all. It hurts us all. It hurts individuals, but by not actually allowing that potential to come to the fore, by not being able to discover it and nurture it, it has really damaging effects for all. So it's very real. In the UK at the moment, obviously, I think we've got one of the 7th largest economies in the world, but we cannot afford to pay our nurses properly. We've got people leaving the systems like that. These are costs. These are costs that drain from not recognizing and using our intelligence properly. So, yeah, sorry, I can easily go off on one about that, but there is a genuine reason behind why we need to make this as accessible as possible. That's the point I was trying to make, and bringing it back to those early steps. The reason why Sona is gamified, we want to gently bring people through this sort of journey of self-discovery to unpack their mind.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that. Sometimes I'm discussing this with my friends, like, how can there be so few geniuses in this world? We mentioned Einstein, Hawkins, other philosophers or scientists, but if you have like 6 or 7 billion people and you just take 0.0001%, there should be like 10,000, 100,000 geniuses, but we still haven't been able to identify or exploit or maximize that.
And it's there. I think there is a study, and I'll share it with you. Maybe you can share it with your audience. It's done by a brilliant organisation called Worlding Data, where they tried to actually work out, exactly how many Einsteins or Marie
Oh,
Curies we have missed over the last 200 years. But there have been thousands. There have been thousands. But talent is everywhere.
yeah.
Opportunity is not. And we're not saying that Sony is the silver bullet here. But if we can raise consciousness around what it means to be smart by a game, that is really powerful. It's really powerful. And let's, I'm always careful when I reference an Einstein or a Marie Curie is, listen, geniuses, those geniuses are, incredibly valuable. But I'm interested in but the bright minds below that, right? Finding geniuses is great. They can make those kind of leaps. But the use of all of those bright minds, to Dom's point, I've done some early testing on Sona, pretty kind of average intelligence, but to understand, the nature of my intelligence, where my strengths are, where my weaknesses are, and to be able to realize my potential based on those kind of data inputs, that has a massive positive sum
Yeah,
effect to the whole
ultimately,
world.
And
yeah.
it's
Go ahead, Don.
yeah, I was just going to say, and what we haven't touched on is if we're as successful as we intend to be and hope we can be with this, we haven't even touched on what the network effect looks like from all of those interconnected users interacting with each other, generating these data sets, and there's a whole additional level of opportunity there, not necessarily just for us, but for the individuals and the organisations who are part of the overall community as well.
Well, what's an example? So I can imagine, I don't know, in the dating realm, like if I have IQ this and she's very good, then
I mean,
maybe
I think
there's
that
a high probability for a match or something. But perhaps,
yeah, I mean that's a simple example. I mean, I guess one of the other obvious areas is if you look at something like LinkedIn, which is there's a lot of different features on LinkedIn. It's got a lot of different services, but it's the primary way for users to sort of share, a resume, and certainly in a lot of industries to share a resume and benefit from the sort of network effect of all of the connections on there with other individuals and other businesses. And if we're starting to build out a network around cognition, around cognitive profile, then there's some very obvious opportunities to kind of cross over into those sorts of spaces as well.
we should definitely run this like in 12 months or 6 months, because then we can more deeply see how that will play out. But yeah, really exciting, guys. I see we are nearing the end of time, but I really enjoyed this topic, and it opened a lot of new ideas for myself, which I've never thought about. And considering that I'm doing this podcast like weekly, that is kind of amazing. And yeah, I always have a feeling of admiration at the same time when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, because there's so many elements and you have this vision, but that's in the future, and in the meanwhile you have to work towards that. So yeah, there's also interesting component of entrepreneurship, I think.
And as a final point, I say we've worked hard, but we're also lucky in having some incredible partners, right? And at the outset, it's just essential. So, the cognitive psychologists that we have that allow us the authority and the confidence to be able to say that when you look at that kind of data, that the games that we play can genuinely kind of do that. We've got tokenomics partners who've been brilliant at helping us bring all of that economy together. So, there's so much going on.
Yeah, and I'd highlight in particular, highlight the guys at Net Zero Capital who believed in us early on and believed in the vision. They've been fundamental to getting us to where we are now.
Yeah, that's also interesting that you mentioned that, because it's not only the people within the organization, but also around and outside of it. Where can people follow the latest development of Sona and find you guys?
On the website is sonaprotocol.xyz. Twitter is just simply Sona Protocol. There's a new website launching in the next few weeks that will be more game focused to complement the protocol side of things. We're splitting them out just in terms of ongoing marketing, but there'll be a link from the existing site to that once it's live.
Awesome.
Discord is you can link to Discord from the website. We are only sort of a month in on that. So yeah, come on in, join the conversation, and yeah, be a part of some of the early testing.
Yeah, yeah. There's going to be a load. There's going to be a load of really cool stuff dropping in Discord over the next few weeks, including what the first NFT drops may look like.
Oh, really cool. I will definitely jump in there, and I put everything into the sections afterwards. So yeah, thanks guys again, and gonna follow the progress, and we'll definitely stay in touch.
Cool.
Hey, Smith, thanks very much, man.
Great to be on.
Yeah, it's a great podcast.
No problem.